explained today why people like Spivak and Baba write the way they do, and I said it was in reaction to the heyday and the dominance and the hegemony of analytic philosophy and its stress upon clearly formulated sentences. And then I explained how the parallel for me was when I first went to Germany and got to the university residence there, and I went on exploring and I counted 50 rooms on my floor and only 2 showers in the common shower area. And I remember thinking in the mornings to try and get a shower and get to class on time is going to be murder. It's going to be just lineups. And how in 2 years there I never once walked into the shower area and found anyone else in it except for another Canadian. And none of the Germans seemed to shower. And then one of them explained to me that showering was a sign of excessive preoccupation with hygiene that had marked the Nazi period of their parents. And their reaction then was to establish their non-Nazi identities through a certain neglect of basic hygiene rituals like showering. So I see Spivak and these people, when they write the way they do so unclearly, it's essentially they're refusing to shower. I'm not sure if that's helpful.
It may be helpful to some. They also tried, well, I don't know how this would contribute anything to what we were talking about, but smoking was also, and continues, well, it's just now declining in Germany, smoking. But it was considered, it was closely linked with freedom, and the kind of freedom that the Nazis suppressed. And Hitler was a major anti-nicotine.
Anti-smoker.
Anti-smoker, yeah.
In fact, he claimed he got the deal from Chamberlain by keeping him in his office and not allowing Chamberlain to smoke until he finally broke down and was willing to sign anything.
Yeah.
He laughed about it. Well, that's what I do with my kids when I want them to concede some point. I just sit them down and I won't let them smoke. You keep a 13-year-old from getting a hold of his cigarettes for an extended period, they soon become compliant.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I started them smoking early.
Yeah. Well, I can only say I'm really happy that I was accepted as an immigrant in this country, where since I've showered basically on a daily basis.
You've always been atypical that way.
And I feel a little superior, I must say.
Yeah.
Though when visiting back in the old country, it's not always easy to keep that regime up.
Well, the first time I went to Britain, I mean that's not Germany obviously, but the first time I went to Britain, and it was December, and I was in Oxford, and I was staying at a relative's, and they asked me if I wanted to take a bath. They didn't have a shower, and I got into the bath and I got 2 inches of warm water into it, and the hot water ran out.
Yeah.
And so I asked around, and then they wanted to reuse it. I was supposed to leave the water in for people after. And this guy was a prof at Oxford, and I said, if this is the norm, I understand why you people lost your empire. You know, I mean, if you can't get more than 2 inches of hot water into a tub, you have no business ruling the rest of the planet.
No, that's true. It was a matter of justice.
Yeah, that was
Justice prevailed.
destined to collapse.
But I guess that I mean, this is the whole area of concern that we've discussed about cultural norms, and you know, in a country like Germany, there's a very clear dominant culture.
Yeah.
A German dominant culture that shares a whole range of basic values, how to do things, or even when basic values are rejected, you can see the underlying common value in it. Say, in terms of opposition can be very radical, because the state in the German tradition is a very strong state.
Yeah.
And so, you know, either you support that very strong state and accept it, or you oppose it, and then you may go to significant lengths and the most radical being the Baader-Meinhof gang trying to undermine the state and get the working class to rise up against it.
Yeah.
Certainly can only be understood in that context. In the Anglo-Saxon context, there's no comparable conception of state. There's no over-identification with it. There's a certain fear of it, and at the same time, there's a very great deal of voluntary compliance with social norms, and that are not really state-enforced. So I think that points to a whole area of I mean, I started out by saying this to say, well, countries like Germany or France or Italy, even though they may have subcultures, they have national cultures that are fairly clearly structured by one ethnoculture with a long history. Now, in immigrant societies like Canada, the question is obviously different, and the question is, well, first of all, is there such a dominant national culture? And the second one, if there is, what is it composed of? What does it look like? And the question is particularly important when the official ideology says that there is no dominant culture,
right.
that there is a multicultural society that we're dealing with. And the question, of course, is, well, what exactly does that mean? Natives in Canada have not really bought into multiculturalism, surprisingly, one would think, because, you know, native culture is just a part of the range of diverse cultures in Canada. But I think they caught on to something, namely that this whole idea of multiculturalism actually does contain a specific culture at its root, and that buying into multiculturalism means buying into that culture which is very different from their own, and would mean, okay, we agree with your definition, and that's fine for us too. But they have not done that, and they have not bought into the doctrine of multiculturalism. Now, maybe they're just obstinate.
The French are that way too. They're obstinate. I mean, the Quebecers, they refuse to see themselves just as another minority group, like any other. They have some other notion.
True.
So, like the natives, native peoples of Canada.
Well, in the case of Quebec, there's a quasi. Well, it's not quasi. There is a separate nation with a separate society.
Quebecers.
Quebecers.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily play out to the same extent it does in the rest of Canada.
Yeah.
And the question is, what culture, what root culture, if any, does the rest of Canada have? And I think for anyone who comes from a non-Anglo-Saxon country, the answer is pretty easy. You notice it very quickly, and that is the dominant culture is an Anglo-Saxon one.